Hey everyone, welcome to the Deep Dive, your favorite Inside Texas show that delves into all the deepest extraneous issues of college football and football in general. It's where we get to be a little bit thoughtful and talk about some of the deeper things that are happening with this football team and in college football and football in general. Hey, if you want to get even more depth in all of your coverage of Longhorn sports, you need to go to Inside Texas, like our video, and help us climb to 10,000 subscribers. And we're not stopping there. After 10,000, Ian, do you know where we're going?
1 million.
Well, I was going to say 11,000, but I love your ambition. And that is the ambition that we're going to need on this deep dive, because we, Ian, are going to talk about the Texas Longhorn defense. And we're going to talk about some of their different sets that they're going to be playing in this year when they face running teams specifically. Texas is going to face some teams that run the ball. Believe it or not everyone in college football is committed to throwing it around 45 or 50 times every game, even though sometimes it feels that way. Texas is going to face some running teams, some of them because they don't have any other option, some of them because they think that's the best way to potentially beat Texas. And the teams we're talking about there, Ian, are Michigan, UTSA, can't forget the Roadrunners, Arkansas, Kentucky, potentially, and then possibly A&M. And that may be more of a desperation strategy than a winning strategy, but we'll see. But Texas is going to face some teams that are going to try to bully them. I think the most obvious team on the schedule is the Michigan Wolverines.
Yeah, Michigan, that's what they want to do to everybody. And they are, I think, they're a real throwback team. The only other comparable team I've seen that will just put a ton of big bodies on the field and just sledgehammer you like this is Stanford.
The Carlisle Indians with Jim Thorpe.
Them and Stanford under Harbaugh and then his successor, Shaw, right?
David Shaw.
Sharon Moore?
Yeah.
It's bad that
Are you having an aneurysm? Are you okay?
I mean, I never knew exactly how to pronounce it, which is bad.
Sharon, yeah.
Sharon, I was living there until recently. Sharon Moore is kind of like David Shaw. I don't know what Shaw's background on the team was, what his role was on the team before he took over as head coach. But Sharon Moore was the offensive line coach. Before that, he was the tight ends coach. And he's all about the Harbaugh put a bunch of big bodies on the field and sledgehammer teams to death. Some of these other teams like Arkansas and UTSA, like you said, are probably this is what they have to do to have a chance. Georgia, maybe Kentucky, and certainly Michigan, they want to blast you with size. So,
yeah, Sharon, one of those deceptive names where if someone at school in high school is like, "Hey, Sharon is mad at you. He wants to fight you after school," you'd be like, "Sharon? I'm not worried about a Sharon." And then you go out there and the dude's 6'4", 300 pounds. That's not good. But hey, let's talk about what Texas is going to do when they're facing a bunch of blockers that are 6'4", 300 pounds with bad intentions. And before we do that, we want to do, anytime we talk about personnel, anytime we talk about alignments, we need to make some disclaimers. So personnel versus alignment, Ian. This is important because I think the casual football fan confuses personnel and alignment. A classic example is when you say Texas runs a 2-4-5 base defense, okay? Does not mean we have 2 defensive linemen on the line of scrimmage, 4 linebackers 5 yards off the line of scrimmage, and then 5 defensive backs arrayed on the football field. Just as the 3-4 generally doesn't mean 3 down linemen and 4 linebackers lined up behind them 6 yards off the ball. What they're describing are personnel. The 3 is 3 defensive linemen. The 4 is 4 linebackers. The 4 behind them would be the secondary. So anyway, always make that distinction. And we're going to try our best to explain that so you don't get confused, because a very common thing you'll hear or you'll see is you'll say, we need to run a little bit more 3-4. And people will be like, I don't like rushing only 3 down linemen. And that's not what that refers to. We're referring to personnel groups. Is that fair, Ian?
Yep.
All right. That disclaimer back. We will probably revisit that 1 or 2 times to remind you. But let's carry on and let's talk about what Texas spends most of their time in. Because most teams are base 3 wide receiver offenses in college football or some variation thereof, Texas spends most of its time in a base nickel. Specifically the 2-4-5. I kind of roll my eyes at that because it's a 4-2-5, and I don't want to talk about all the stupid reasons that make it different. But we're going to put that up on the screen. If you're just listening in podcast form, Ian and I are going to describe what is on the screen. Ian, can you give the good people a quick rundown of what it is they're seeing here of a base, not our base, but this is our base nickel, I should say. When we're in a nickel, this is what it looks like. This is how we spend most of our snaps.
Yeah. Let's start real quick with the offense. You have the 5 circles are the offensive linemen. The offense, virtually modern offense, you always have 5 offensive linemen, right? You always have Q, the quarterback. You virtually always have R, a running back, in those alignments, more or less. The Y is the tight end. So I have him here attached on the end of the line of scrimmage like a traditional tight end. A lot of times he plays a little bit off the line of scrimmage, but don't worry about that. X, H, and Z are your wide receivers. H is the slot. When a team has 3 wide receivers like this, you want to match with 3 cornerbacks, basically. And that's how Texas's nickel defense works. So we'll start up front. When we say 2-4-5, we mean 2 traditional defensive linemen, 95 Alfred Collins, 45 Vernon Broughton. You also see the 8 and the 88 are on the line of scrimmage. 4-2-5 versus 2-4-5, it's the same thing basically. 8 is Trey Moore, 88 is Barron Sorrell. They're ends, they're edges. They play on the edge, but they're on the defensive line, right? Then you got the other 2 off-ball traditional linebackers behind them. 0, Anthony Hill, 33, David Benda. Maybe that'll be Maurice Blackwell more than we think. Doesn't matter for now. Those are the 2 linebackers. And then in the secondary, you have 7, Jahdae Barron, who lines up as the short side boundary cornerback. Number 5, Malik Muhammad, who lines up as the far side field cornerback. 3, Jalen Gilbo will play that star position, which is just the nickel, just matches up against the slot. And then the 2 safeties, 16, I have 16, Michael Taft, 2, Derek Williams. Obviously, 13, Andrew Makuba may be there instead. We don't know for sure. Don't worry about that. But you have 5 defensive backs, 2 or 4 defensive linemen based on how you want to count it, and 2 or 4 linebackers.
So the reason this base nickel is more and more common in college football and football in general, Ian, is because if teams typically are lining now with 3 wide receivers and their tight end is often, not always, but often also a pass catching threat, you could often be outmanned if you're in a traditional 4 down lineman, 3 linebacker defense, because you're often asking that extra linebacker instead of the nickel to cover a wide receiver, at least in some fashion. Maybe not all the way down the field, but he's going to have more coverage responsibilities. And we don't love that matchup of a highly skilled 190-pound wide receiver who runs a 4.40 and a 4.0 short shuttle against our 235-pound linebacker. So that's why we have that alignment.
Yeah. Slightly older Texas fans, you'll maybe scoff at this, but when Oklahoma played Roy Williams as their nickel, that was pretty groundbreaking that they were playing like a base nickel with Roy Williams in that role instead of a linebacker. And Roy Williams was like 6'1", 220, right? Nowadays, offenses have gotten so skilled that you may not even want a guy that big in the nickel. So like I remember people would be like, hey, Jelani McDonald, he could be a 230-pound nickel. We could play, and that'll help us in the SEC. No, not really. SEC teams that spread the ball around are extremely skilled. And you look at Alabama, you look at Georgia, they play a third corner 70% of the time. So Gilbo in Texas's instance, whatever. We can move on now to the 3-4.
Absolutely. So If teams are going to come out with more of a running alignment, and that running is not just turning around and handing the ball off to the running back, some of these teams that we're going to play, in fact, multiple teams we play, are going to have a dual threat. So whether that's Alex Orji, potentially for Michigan, or Taylon Green for Arkansas, even Brock Vandagriff for Kentucky can run the ball a little bit. So this is something Texas has to be aware of. But before we talk about alignment and personnel, if you're aligned to buying a home, you need the best damn personnel you can find. And that personnel is singular. It's person. His name is Gabe Winslow. You can reach him at 832-557-1095. Why do you want to do your mortgage with Gabe? Well, he's highly ethical. He's a freaking genius. He's a former National Merit Scholar. He's a Texas grad, and he's just really damn good at what he does. Give him a call. Find out what separates him from the pack and why you want to align yourself with this elite personnel. Doesn't matter what your preferred defense is. He's going to be on the offense for you. All right, Ian, let's talk about this proposed run-stopping group, and we're going to call it a 3-4-4 defense. So this is a 3-4. We've got the nickel off the field, correct?
That's right. So the reason for this, in the diagram, I drew the H now as being close to the formation. The real trick is that what we're assuming here is that the H, instead of being a 190-pound slot, he's now a 240, 250-pound tight end. And that's the key difference, is that you need big bodies to match. So we got a 3-4 defense. Basically, what we're doing is the two edges stay on the field, but now they count as outside linebackers. You don't have the nickel corner anymore, and you replace him with, in this case, a nose tackle. So we have 15 in the middle, Bill Norton. In between, 45, Vernon Brodden, and 95, Alfred Collins. We've added a third big body to the box. Then that allows you to play your two edges, 8 Trey Moore and 88 Barron Sorrell, on the extended edges. And you just have more size overall. The linebackers stay the same. The cornerbacks and the safeties stayed the same. But
so, Ian, quick alignment versus personnel reminder.
Yeah.
We said this is a 3-4-4. How many defensive guys do we have on the line of scrimmage?
5 and potentially 6 if you're playing press coverage, or 7.
Yeah. So we're running effectively a 5-2 if you're thinking about alignment. The personnel, though, now the 4 linebackers, the 2 outside linebackers, we're getting like old Alabama, old Bill Belichick Patriot-sized outside linebackers here. We got Barron Sorrell pushing 260 out there on one side, and we got Trey Moore, suddenly not so undersized now because he's playing sort of a pure outside linebacker edge sort of role. He's going to pin his ears back and attack, right? And he's, all 240, maybe 245 now. So this is a big-bodied, physical group. And if Michigan, particularly with Alex Orji, who's all of 235, 240, and they've got big tight ends like Colston Loveland, they're going to come out. And if they want to try to bully Texas, this is the defense we're going to roll out to say, you're not going to bully us. And I think that this is a really interesting unit, not only as run stoppers, but if someone tries to play action us and beat us down the field, throw the ball, I like this as a pass rushing group as well.
Yeah, I like this maybe most as a pass rushing group because you've got, all the linebackers can blitz from any direction. And the traditional advantage of the 3-4, which killed offenses like this, like the Indianapolis Colts used to love playing with 2 tight ends. But then every time they play the Patriots or the Steelers in the playoffs, they'd have big problems because you don't know whether 8 or 88 is coming off the edge or both. And then if you get overly fixated on that, then 0 Anthony Hill might run through an unprotected gap up the middle. And it just gets very confusing. Teams eventually just solve this by spreading them out. But the teams Texas is worried about are not going to attack this by throwing, or else Texas wouldn't play this. They want to run the ball. And you just get a big advantage from being able to hem the offense in from the outside in with those big outside linebackers. if you don't let them get any space on the perimeter, then everything becomes 3 yards and a cloud of dust inside. Now, maybe this is a good time to note that last year when Texas played the 3-4, which was every so often they would play this defense, the problem was Jahdae Barron was the nickel, and he wasn't a cornerback. So when Texas played base defense, they would basically replace Jahdae Barron with Jet Bush. That worked out pretty well, honestly, against teams that wanted to run the ball. But, touchdown against Texas Tech notwithstanding, Jahdae Barron was a much more impactful playmaker for Texas than Jet Bush. But the thing about Texas's 3-4 last year was that they would play usually T'Vondre Sweat, Byron Murphy, and then Alfred Collins as a defensive end, kind of like he's lined up here. And that was so overwhelming to the teams on Texas's schedule last year, especially in the Big 12, but even Alabama had problems with it, that it just became a non-starter. You would see teams that normally would try to get big and run the ball like Iowa State or Kansas State just throw that out the window, give up, and spread Texas out and try to throw. Because the defensive line, they basically were putting 3 defensive linemen on the field that teams couldn't block without double teaming. And so they just ran out of blockers and they would just get smashed. This year, Texas's edge and secondary in this alignment is a lot better, but it's kind of a wait and see on whether those 3 down linemen are going to be able to have the same impact.
Yeah, and that's going to be interesting, Ian, because you can be in an alignment and you can have personnel, but then there's also a third part to further complicate this. And this is something that I think people overlook if you get too fixated on the whiteboard sometimes. Disposition. Meaning, are your 3 interior defensive line trying to penetrate and disrupt and destroy things before they even get started? Or are they trying to occupy blockers and turn David Benda and Anthony Hill and probably one of our safeties into heroes who are going to have, not a blocker within their zip code running up and getting free shots on the quarterback if he chooses to run, or the running back if he's getting the ball handed to them. So and what I mean by disposition is not where they're aligned, how they're acting after the snap of the ball. Are they sprinting through a gap and trying to mess things up? Or are they trying to catch blockers and invite as many blockers on them as possible and hold strong? Last year, more often than not, we did the latter. This year, we may be doing some more of the former, meaning we may tell Alfred and Vernon, along with Trey and Barron, get up the field and go cause some trouble. Bill, you occupy space there in the middle and give us some center of gravity. And then we're going to say to Anthony Hill and David Benda, hey, blockers may leak out on you because we're trying to disrupt here, but it's your job to be quick and smart and fundamental, avoid those guys and still go make the play. So that's going to be an interesting tension as well in this defense.
Yeah, and we've seen so like a good primer for those 2 different styles. Last year, Texas, as you said, was a eat space, occupy blocker kind of team when they played 3 down. Well, they were like that no matter, that was their disposition in every formation. But when they played a 3-4, it was get low, eat space, eat blockers. Todd Orlando's 3-4 or 3-3, his version of this was what you're describing. Poona Ford, shoot an A gap.
Yep.
Charles Omenihu and Brecken Hager, shoot the B gaps. Create disruption, and then we'll clean up behind you. So I think we both agree that this team would probably be better at the Orlando style. Vernon Brodin and Alfred Collins were recruited to maximize the Orlando style. And we'll see. I think we'll see at least some of it, but we'll see to what extent.
Well, and to add a disclaimer and a caveat to Ian's point, we're only talking about the big boys on the front when we mentioned Todd Orlando. We're not suggesting that Michael Taft be blitzed from Seguin. That's not what we're advocating. That's not what we're discussing. So just think we're narrow focus. One thing I will also point out about this, almost always, and where Jet Bush really was a valuable player because he was so physical,
yeah,
is Number 8 down there at the bottom, that's Trey Moore. Particularly, sometimes teams will go instead of double tight, they'll go double backs with one tight end. Particularly in that formation where 8 isn't covered, meaning there's not a guy directly across from him like a tight end. We fired Jett Bush up the field like a maniac. And his whole job was disrupt. And what he would typically do was destroy any pulling lineman when teams would try to run outside on us, or destroy any back who was trying to gain the edge. And he would just obliterate that guy and then allow everyone else behind him to clean and eat, right? Trey Moore doing that is Jett Bush was a good athlete and a physical guy. Trey Moore doing that could add another wrinkle entirely. Like, you're talking about a guy who's so quick and agile that he could get in the backfield at the mesh point if they're trying to run zone read and freaking strip the ball, right? I mean, that's the level of athlete here. And sometimes you want to just fire those guns, and offenses aren't very good at dealing with that sort of disruption and quickness.
Yeah, and even in the Big Ten, Michigan doesn't face guys like that anymore. Teams are not recruiting and developing guys to do that so much. I think that's kind of – Michigan can get so big. They'll play like 7 offensive linemen. How many guys do I have left? 3 tight ends and 1 running back.
Yeah.
They'll do that like a lot. Like no
quarterback, just direct snap to the running back, right?
Yeah, I mean, when Alex Orchie is in, that's basically how it works, right? And even the 3-4 can get bullied by some of the things that Michigan does. So I'm actually interested in that game if they go even crazier and they play like a 4-4 or something, get 4 defensive linemen and then still have, or if they just rely on Trey Moore's speed to do some heavy lifting for them. I think that's like maybe a pivotal point in that matchup, is whether Trey Moore is an edge here, as a Sam off-ball linebacker, whether he can be so disruptive off the edge that it short circuits Michigan's power game.
Yeah,
I don't know.
You write a Substack, which is very good, called America's War Game. And part of the parallels between war and football, George Carlin, of course, pointed out in a famous comedic monologue that in war and in football, particularly on defense, you're either holding space or you're attacking space, right? You're taking ground or you're defending ground.
Sorry, was this George Carlin or Dan Carlin that said this?
George Carlin.
Okay.
The comedian. Look it up. He compares football and baseball. But basically, you should check it out. So basically, the idea is, do you want to defend or do you want to go take and attack? And there's times when neither, one of the two is the better answer. If you're talking about the Maginot Line, probably not the best to have a static defense against modern warfare, right? But that's where Texas has to figure out things when teams go extreme, when teams get big. Do you want to just hold ground and try to get big with them? Well, you need to get the right personnel out there, certainly, but you may want to use your quickness advantages to disrupt things before they even get started, right? And that's the thing that you have to balance and look at. And truthfully, in a game, until you try both, you won't know what's going to work. But the key is to adjust. So that's something.
Yeah, I just want to further elaborate on that point. PK has often been we're going to hold ground really well kind of guy. Yeah. And Nansen has been we're going to attack with speed. And if Texas does not get the outcome in Ann Arbor that they want, that is going to be that's going to be like all we talk about the following week, me and you.
Yep. We're going to have a very interesting deep dive the week before Michigan and the week after, because it's going to be very informative and tell us a lot. But Michigan's not the only team that's going to try to run the ball. As we mentioned, there's other teams that will try. And yes, UTSA will try to run the ball. They've got 3 good running backs, and they've got a good tight end in Oscar Cardenas, and they've got an inexperienced quarterback. along with a pretty experienced offensive line. And UTSA, from a G5 perspective, is one of the more physical G5 teams that you'll see. And the way you might know that is if you have my 2024 Longhorn football preview, Thinking Texas Football. You could buy it at Amazon, Smashwords, or Apple. There's still time. And if you want to know how to buy it, just read it in the show notes right below us. Ian, I think we've said our piece about this and what people can expect. Is there anything we should add before we bid the good folks goodbye?
Probably, but nothing's coming to mind. We'll find out in the comments what we missed.
That's right. We will find out in the comments, and inevitably there will be a comment that I don't want to run a 3-4 because I don't want 3 down linemen and 4 linebackers way behind them, even though we talked about that. So anyway, like our video, help us climb to our inevitable surge to 1 million subscribers, and as Ian has prophesied. But most of all, hey, if you're liking this content, it's free. Like our video at minimum, and then you want to throw around a couple of bucks, go subscribe at Inside Texas, buy my preview, and get on Ian's Substack and complete your football education. For Ian Boyd, I am Paul Wadlington, saying we're about 10 days out from football. Bring it. Let's go. Hook 'em.